Hello, friends. I can even see some faces. This is great. It's so good to be back here at Christchurch HackerCon. They've put up with a lot of my whimsical nonsense over the years, like the last time that we had a Halloween conference in 2020 where I had Halloween costume changes. If you can't tell, I'm a fancy bear. Yeah. And last year, just not even talking about computers at all. Going completely off topic. And I really wanted to come back here and give you some more of my whimsical nonsense, but it's really hard to be whimsical right now. So I'm sorry, this talk is going to be a bit of a downer, but it's something that I think does need to be talked about. So please hear me out, because there have been things that have been going on for a while now that are really concerning to historians, because I don't know if you've noticed, over the last decade, we've had this emboldening and this rise of these extremist voices, these fringe ultra-nationalist groups bleating on about how multiculturalism is an existential threat to their culture and their identity. And normally groups like this would just kind of be like dismissed as a bunch of crackpots, but they're spreading lies, they're spreading conspiracy theories about marginalized people, they're advocating for violence against them, they're demanding this return to this order of an imagined, idealized past, and instead of being mocked or debunked, they're actually getting traction. There's mainstream voices out there, media, podcasts, that are kind of repeating this toned-down version of their false claims and their hateful rhetoric in a way that kind of makes it appealing to ordinary people who are maybe doing it a bit tough and are looking for some kind of explanation as to why they can't get ahead, and they're finding these views really seductive. And we're seeing this new wave of these populist authoritarian leaders who claim that they're outside of politics, they're just a man of the people, promising stability and prosperity, and largely doing it by advocating violence to, again, these scapegoated outgroups. Sometimes in coded language, not saying it directly, and sometimes they're just blatantly saying they're going to enact violence against people, and these moderate defenders are out there insisting that, no, they don't really mean it literally, they're just saying that, it's not really going to happen. And this is all really, really familiar. So, as Mark Twain famously never said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And right now, it's starting to rhyme with smashism. And if there's one thing that historians hate even more than misattributed popular quotes, it's that fascism or something like it is coming back on our watch. So we know that these demagogues, they'll make good on their threats of violence. It's not just talk. We know that as they start gaining traction, they start demanding loyalty and obedience. They invent new threats to pin the blame on. And this is why we need to talk about it. This has real consequences for real people. The other reason that we need to talk about it here at a hacker conference is that these authoritarian movements, they need technology. They need us. They need technology to keep people in a state of paranoia and to overcome the objections, quite reasonable objections, to the conspiracies and the lies that they spread. They base their demands for violence as a means to their ends. They need technology to spread propaganda, to surveil, to classify, control, and punish people. So I've been thinking too much about this recently, and I've also been thinking about how we, as people who work with technology, can resist it. So who recognizes this phrase, right? We've all seen this. So this is Google's unofficial motto. It came from their employee handbook in the early years, and it's often invoked, I'm ranting at the pub about how fascism is back and we need to do something about it, and someone says, You remember when tech used to say things like, don't be evil, like this is the antidote to all of the horrors? Actually, I don't think it's that useful. Because, well, first of all, evil is subjective to the point that Google itself did not know. It's like, we'll know it when we see it, you know. It's like art or pornography, you know, I don't know. I can't tell you a definition, but we'll know it when we see it. But also, not only do we not maybe have a clear idea, it's also a really high bar to clear, but it's also, don't be is so passive. Don't be evil is, if we just don't go out of our way to cause cruelty and harm and wickedness, our good intentions will somehow make everything sort itself out. And most harm from technology is not a result of evil, of deliberate malevolence. It's indifference or obliviousness. So we know that fascism has never been defeated through good intentions alone. It requires people to act. So one of the problems with why people who are in positions of power or who work with technology are oblivious or don't consider it their responsibility to do something about it is these harms are not evenly distributed. They tend to affect groups that are already marginalized in society in ways that might not necessarily be obvious to us. So I think there's 3 areas that I'm going to be focusing on in this talk, and I think that we need to focus on generally. The one is, I'm using the term criminalized people deliberately because crime is what is and isn't considered criminal is subjective, and it does change, especially in times like these where it's not just necessarily whose crimes are considered worth pursuing and whose aren't. It's also, we're seeing the emergence of new categories of crime. People, you know, the US has recriminalized abortion. New Zealand recently talked about policing which bathrooms people could use. You know, like it would be funny were it not so horrifying. We're also looking at an increase in harassment of outgroups and dissenters. A lot of this happens online with online harassment intended to sort of punish people who don't go along with what is considered acceptable ideologies. But this also does, we know that this does escalate to in-person violence and threats. And also there's all of this return to gender roles and traditions and all of this that contributes to, and I think gives license to people to, we're seeing escalating family violence and especially intimate partner violence involving technology, also as part of this sort of this societal shift. So I think we need to consider all of those 3 areas. So one thing that we could, so I just want to present some ideas. Like, this is a large problem. This is a fairly intractable problem, but there are some things we can all do to make things a little bit better and a little bit safer. And I think threat modeling is a really good place to start. I assume that most people have at least come across the concept of threat modeling before. It's a structured way of looking at a system and identifying ways that it might contribute to harm and what we can do to address those harms. There's lots of different ways to do it. I find Adam Shostak's 4 questions model really useful. It's easy to teach people, it's pretty simple, and also there's some great resources online to learn it, especially if you like Star Wars Lego. So you can learn more about this if you would like to. It starts with 4 questions. What are we working on? You know, what is the system? What could go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And then looking back, checking our hypothesis, did we do a good job? So this is a speculative process, you know, future tense questions. What are we, you know, what could go wrong? So in order to overcome, I think, so get out of our bubbles and increase the ability for us to identify some of these harms that might not necessarily be apparent to us. One of the things we need to do is get as diverse a team as possible. I do have to acknowledge that have a diverse team of workmates is not as easy as, easier said than done in the current climate. Most of the tech layoffs over the last 5 years have disproportionately impacted people of colour, women, disabled people, other already underrepresented groups in tech. But we need to have a team of diverse perspectives, both in terms of people who have a diverse array of sort of demographic aspects, and also different parts of your business, diversity of people who have experience with customer perspectives, design, as well as security, testing, as well as developers. It does need to be said that diverse is not exactly the same thing as representative. There may be, you will never get a fully representative group, and also people may not necessarily want to disclose their lived experience with these things due to stigma, or just because it's actually really crappy and traumatic to have to dig up some of this stuff if you're someone who's experienced it sometimes. But the more diverse your group is, the better the impact the results will be. And where you do have gaps, seek external impact from maybe a focus group, or maybe of users, or maybe a external expert consultants to fill in the gaps in your knowledge. So tech does have a history of exploitative and extractive practices, so I think it is really important to make sure that if you're involving people, asking them to draw on their own lived experience of traumatic things, or involving expert people from underrepresented communities, that you do respect their input, be really clear and transparent about how you're going to use the information they give you, and recognising their reward, their contributions. We don't want this to become another security champions thing, if it's yet another thing you do on top of your job that isn't really your job, and when it does come to layoffs time, all of that invisible labour counts against you. So do consider how you are, the impact on your participants, and also I think it's important that we all build up the areas we might not be so aware of in our own knowledge. There's lots of books on these topics of these of harms to different groups and that are out there that I would recommend that you engage with. These are just that's the sort of the meta level of get your team together, work through those questions. But there's some particular areas where these harms manifest more than others, and one of those is that when we're talking about what are we building, it's pretty common in threat modeling to sort of just look at what's the bit that's under our control, and we really need to take a broader view that looks at the broader context, the people and processes and the inputs and outputs there as well, particularly if it involves algorithms, and we're all being pushed to use AI at work a lot. I'm sure that we need to acknowledge that all decision-making, human and digital, has bias, and we need to understand that, especially because the biases and the limitations and the weaknesses in these algorithms tend to disproportionately affect these underrepresented groups, and also they can compound. So if you've got bad input data, or biased input data in a biased model being used by operators who themselves have biases, all of this compounds to amplify that harm. So you need to, I think, understand that there are things like benchmarking tools that are starting to come out for some models that sort of give an independent view of where they might have weaknesses, so that you can understand them, and then you can build that into your understanding of your system when you're making decisions about what you're going to do about those to counteract them. So for one example, like this is a really huge growth areas, the AI, facial recognition systems. Now, there are a few different types of facial recognition systems. There's the one-to-one verification, like you get for like your Face ID on your phone, but also potentially like time carding systems. Some people are now deciding to use this for instead of having a key card for like an apartment building, you'll unlock it with your face. But more commonly, we see the one-to-many, the are you this person that's on the watch list of people we have that we're looking for. And there's a growth of behavioral ones, so it's not who are you, it's what are you. It's of people claiming that they can detect people who are shoplifting or people who are being deceptive in a job interview. So the research, there's really strong research that there are limitations with facial recognition technology, but they're often overlooked or ignored. And again, they're compounding. So there are issues with computer vision. It was based on the concept of looking for contrast between light and dark, which means it's inherently less effective on darker skinned people. And then you combine that with how they are trained. So they're usually trained on data sets that were cheaply and easily assembled, which are unrepresentative. And then so all of this compounds. And often the people who are receiving an alert on these things, they've been taught to trust the technology and act on it without perhaps having as much critical awareness, and so all of these things compound. It's a really good example of how not to run a trial. 2017, the Metropolitan Police in London decided to do facial recognition to detect suspected criminals at large events. Now, their trial events were all events in diverse, predominantly non-white neighbourhoods or cultural events like the Notting Hill Carnival, which is one of the largest events in London for the Caribbean community and celebrating Caribbean culture. And they made probably every mistake imaginable. They used a model with, at that point, really well-known and well-documented higher false positive rates for people of colour, particularly women of colour. They rolled it out in these neighbourhoods that were already over-policed, and they went way over the remit of what their watch list was meant to be. It was meant to just be people who were known criminals who had not yet been apprehended, and they started including everything else they had in their database of people who were past offenders, people who were associates. Now, associates included people who were family members or maybe lived in the same apartment building as someone who was one of their people that they were, who were wanted, and vulnerable people, which included youths and people with perhaps mental disabilities. They just put everyone they had on their lists in there. And it had a 98% false detection rate. They did declare it a success on account of some of those people who were falsely identified turned out to be other people who were on their lists. Again, neighbours, family members, vulnerable people, it's a long list. But they declared that a success and rolled it out again, and it continued to perform about that well. And of course, once someone was flagged, they immediately just treated them, assumed that they were a criminal suspect, put the onus on them to prove that they weren't who the system said they were. Which I think brings us to a really important point, is that every time we talk about the biases of AI decision-making and systems like this, someone says, well, we need a human in the loop. And it's, yeah, okay, not terrible advice, but I think we need to think about that qualitatively, of not all humans in the loop are humaning in the loop equally. It's not a panacea, so we need to think about not just the technical aspects of our system when we're designing it, but also how people are going to behave. So, are they going to act in a way that counteracts biases there? Are they able to challenge that information without punishment or consequences to themselves? and also are there ways that they might enable harm? So while I was preparing this talk, earlier this month, I saw a great article in RNZ's news page about how police in New Zealand are rolling out new technology that allows them to, if you call 111, they can find the location of your cell phone. And it's like, okay, that could be really useful in an emergency, but I want to know that they've got some safeguards in place to make sure that people aren't going to abuse this system and use it in ways that are unintended to look people up who perhaps they shouldn't. I said, oh, don't worry, the police know they've been told that they're only allowed to use it for this one thing, so they definitely won't do that. And then the related articles link is police know that the number of lookups of their number plate reader systems have doubled in the last year, and they don't know whether it is appropriate or not. Specifically, they didn't define what appropriate use was clearly enough for them to then define what inappropriate use was. And then there was also that article's related stories link was a story about this is all this month. These are all stories from October 2025. New Zealand police, the complaint against an officer who, had an employment process from looking up the file of a rape complainant whose case he was not on to get enough personal information about her to get her into a relationship with him. So it's not enough to have a human in the loop. You must be thinking about how do we counteract their ways to exacerbate this while also encouraging their ways to be part of the solution to make sure these systems are used appropriately, they are vetted, and they are, results are not taken at face value. And while we're talking about the human aspect, we also need to talk about our users. Because there's too many cases. I have this little, I used to be very good about keeping every little anecdote I found that was relevant to this topic, keeping a log, but I really had to stop collecting these ones because there's too many cases of people being harmed by the technology they use, and the people who make that technology saying, well, no, our software was secure, it was safe, it just wasn't used correctly. There's just a horrendous number of cases of this, of, well, we had MFA, they didn't turn it on, or their account was safe, they just had it breached because they used the same password somewhere else. And statistics about people's behavior on the internet, always a bit difficult, they're usually survey-based, so they're all a bit limited. But when 70 to 80% of internet users are reusing passwords at least some of the time, when up to 80% of adults in relationships allow their partner to access their device and their accounts, and this is growing, and this is normalized, and apparently for 18 to 30-year-olds, not having your partner refusing to give you access to their social media or their phone is apparently a red flag now. So this is normal. Not normal as in good, but normal as in common. And so we need to figure that into our designs. We can't just say, well, we told you so, and ignored the fact that we know that people are doing this. We need to, I still think we need to encourage users to have good behavior. This is not a, well, we'll just assume the user is, this is not a the user is stupid thing. This is the user has behaviors that we assume they won't or shouldn't, and we need to build it accordingly. Because the reason this matters is that the consequences of this, it can be deadly. Like, literally, this can be misused in ways, especially in intimate relationships, that cause real harm. So ironically, it's the low-tech nature of technology-facilitated abuse that makes it actually harder to address with some of our standard threat modeling approaches. A lot of it uses off-the-shelf software that isn't spyware. It's just commercial location tracking apps. It's using, like, logging into an account as opposed to anything that, you know, we would recognize as hacking. And it usually takes advantage of the fact that intimate relationships, that they tend not to start with abuse, they tend to escalate towards abuse or violence, and so there'll be a honeymoon phase, often where a partner is maybe offering to help out, or like, I'll set that up for you, you're not so good with technology, or a pressure phase, a boundary testing phase, where people might expect or say, hey, it's a red flag that you're not giving me access to your social media DMs, and then that is later exploited, either later in the relationship or after the relationship ends. So I'm really excited about this study. The QR code is there, it'll take you to the ACM, if you remember, you can read it, otherwise it's got enough information. You're smart, you can find a PDF online. This, I think, is a really exciting study where the people who did the study got people who have lived experience of intimate partner violence, either in or after leaving a relationship, and asked them what problems they saw with smart home connected devices and what could be done about it. And these are people who consider themselves not technical, and the things that they came up with, I think, are really brilliant, and like, we can apply them. This is just one example that I was able to find, but it really shows that people who have lived experience can tell you what would have helped them in that situation, and I think it's a lot more practical than simply telling people, well, simply never share a password, simply never share a device, or, you know, like some of the examples they gave was that these, like, home devices assume that everyone in the house is trusted, that it's hard to see whether someone other than you has access, and it's hard to revoke access when someone has previously been trusted and no longer is. So QR code there if you want to go read that one. I think it's really great and it's really exemplary. Okay, and the heavy stuff. So trying to deal with the technological harms of encroaching fascism feels often like we're trying to hold back the tide one drop at a time, and it is heavy, but I think one important thing that we can learn from history is that the future is not inevitable. History is shaped by the decisions and actions of people, and not just powerful people, ordinary people. And if we don't like the way things are heading, we can and we need to change it. It's a photo of the mural to the site of the Battle of Cable Street, where Oswald Mosley's fascists marched in the streets of London, and the people of London's East End went, nah, no thanks. So people have defeated fascism before, and we can again. Oppressive movements succeed because the people in those movements know how to mobilize and make themselves sound bigger, more established, more accepted, more reasonable and normal than they are. So we need to start turning up and showing people that actually normal people don't agree. I know it's easier just to sort of like do nothing and hope for the best, but we need to vote. We need to submit on terrible laws, contact your MP or your local council to say, no, actually, we don't want this. When you see this, this push towards authoritarian and towards harm of marginalized groups. And also, we can refuse to do business with companies that are exploiting the political climate with no regard for the people it harms. So I said earlier that one of the problems with don't be evil is that most harm does not come from people being deliberately malicious, but from either being oblivious or having other priorities, and that other priority is normally money. It's normally maximizing shareholder value. And it's hard to threat model our way out of these situations because it's not a flaw in the technical system or the design of the process. it's the whole idea itself, like people selling location data about their users that's been anonymized. Grindr in, I think it was 2019, decided to sell de-identified location data of its users to make a side hustle revenue stream. And of course, because it was real-time fine-grained location data, it was easily re-identifiable, because if you know where someone lives and works and maybe where they go to the gym, you can probably work out who they are. Some people were outed and lost their jobs as a result of that. As far as I know, it did not lead to any physical harm or deaths, but also, depending on who the people whose data it is, it can lead to serious harms. I've also seen like platforms with false political advertisements aimed at disenfranchising people. I think the average number of complaints you need to take a political ad that is blatant disinformation off Facebook is around 32 complaints, even if that advertiser has... No, sorry, it's 32 different ads that have been taken down for being false, and then your account will be suspended. And they don't stop you creating a new one. So that's, they have done some sums and worked out that they say they don't want this on their platform, but also they want up to millions of dollars in ad revenue from you first. And we're also seeing this rise of this sort of behavior-based, activity-based stuff that gets way too close to phrenology for my liking. So sometimes the answer to what are we going to do about it is not build it at all. Threat model, your threat model can help you make the case, and maybe management will listen, and if it can't, so this is the extreme option, but you do have the option to refuse to do things you know are harmful and cannot be done safely. So this is an extreme option. I know that this is the current job market. This is not something to be taken lightly, but it's possible. It has been done, and it only works when you are organized, when you are doing this collectively with your peers, when it's visible, when the case you are making is highly visible, which requires educating your peers, educating management, and educating the public, and having really clear demands about what you would want to achieve. So there was precedent in 2018 with FANG companies doing this, we won't build it, effectively strikes against building certain technologies for the military-industrial complex. So, summing up real quick, because I'm so sorry I've talked a bit longer than I expected, this, useless. Instead, we need to be... showing up? Okay, it is showing up. We need to be responsible for the technology that we are involved in creating and testing and putting out into the world. So build your threat model and consider the hidden harms, not just the obvious ones to your business or to sort of undifferentiated users, but to users who are at greater risk of those harms. Include the impacts of biased inputs and outputs and human factors, as well as the technology. And I think really importantly, speak up and push back. Nothing is inevitable, and we have defeated fascism before, and we can again. Whew. Thank you.
I am a super genius.